Thank you for joining us on another Vegan Pulse. Today, another segment of Making Sense with Gabriel Gaarden. Stick around. We'll be right back. Hi, Gabriel. How are you?
Hey Nancy, how's it going? I'm doing well.
I'm doing good. I'm glad to have you again in another segment of Making Sense with Gabriel. I like to shake my head when I say that because it sounds like it's like such a whimsical thing to do.
Cool.
Are there certain foods or drinks that might interact with my medications?
The short answer is yes. It'd be hard for me to come up with a comprehensive list off the top of my head. But yes, if people are taking this, the specific thing, since there can be the the general term in the nutrition and in the medical world for that is drug nutrient interactions, and that's a real phenomenon. And so if somebody's on a medication, the wisest thing for them to do would be to talk to their doctor who's prescribed them the medication, because their doctor, if their doctor's doing their due diligence, should know whether there are any drug nutrient interactions that might take place with a particular medication. And because there's so many different medications, right, there can be a whole variety of different drug nutrient interactions that might take place. Some of the big ones are, if you're on a blood thinner, which many people are if they're at increased risk of a heart attack or a stroke, then many Americans take some form of blood thinner. And vitamin K is a coagulant. So it helps our blood to coagulate so that we don't bleed out and lose too much blood if we get a cut, or some kind of damage that's going to, damage our vascular system and cause bleeding. So vitamin K is super important. But there's an important drug nutrient interaction. If somebody's on a blood thinner, they obviously don't want their blood to coagulate too much, because that can lead to an increased risk of something like a heart attack or a stroke. And so if that's the case for a particular person, they want to be careful with their vitamin K intake. And again, vitamin K is really important because vitamin K is found in healthy whole plant foods. And the principal source for vitamin K, or one of the heavy hitters, is dark leafy greens. And again, dark leafy greens are one of the healthiest foods on the planet. So think spinach, think kale, think all the different types of lettuces that have that dark green color. And we should be eating a lot of those foods, generally speaking. But for somebody on a blood thinner, they don't want to. The most important thing if you're on a blood thinner is you don't want to have big spikes in your vitamin K intake if your normal baseline is like you hardly ever eat dark leafy greens. And so generally speaking, you want to have a pretty steady vitamin K intake. So it doesn't mean you can't eat dark leafy greens, but you don't want to go from zero to hero, just like we've talked about in other podcasts, with too much fiber all at once, too much exercise all at once. If you haven't been doing those things on a regular basis, you don't want to have too much vitamin K if your normal baseline is very little vitamin K. And so that would be, you want to work with your doctor to say, hey, I know dark leafy greens are super important for me, but I'm going to make sure not to eat too much in any one given meal, or I'm going to make sure not to eat any dark leafy greens for 6 days a week, and then have 2 pounds of kale that one day a week because I'm trying to make up for the rest of the week when I didn't eat all my dark leafy greens. You don't want to do that if you're on a blood thinner. And also, we shouldn't be doing that anyway if we're not, because it's good to get a more modest portion of dark leafy greens every day, or at least as many days as possible, rather than only doing it one day a week. The more modest amount every day is going to have a more positive impact on our health, because it gives our body the regular exposure to that fiber and all those other wonderful nutrients that come in things like dark leafy greens and other whole plant foods. So
And
that's a big one. And there's a number of other drug nutrient actions that can take place. And so if somebody's on a pharmaceutical a prescribed medication, they want to make sure that whenever that's prescribed, or if they've already been on it for a long time and they don't know whether or not there might be a drug nutrient interaction possible, when they go in for a checkup to see the doctor, hopefully once a year or so, if not more often, they're going to ask the doctor, hey, I want to make sure that this interaction doesn't have a drug nutrient interaction going on that could impact my health.
now the only problem I see there is that from experience, right? That the doctors don't really know nutrition. and they put you in on these medicines where there can be a reaction, and they don't tell you about it because they don't know about it. And yet these are the same doctors who'll say to somebody, you have to eat more meat, or you have to eat more fish, or you have to eat more whatever. So I brought it up because I'm on a blood thinner, and I had to look at it on the website, on Google it, if there was going to be any interactions with anything. And it happened that vitamin K, like you said, something I need to be aware of. And people need to take responsibility for their own health and eat, a plant-based diet for a healthier way of living, but also not depend so much on individuals who they might think that are, we have to listen to this person because unless they had that nutrition education, it's a hit and miss.
It is hit and miss, but that's something that I recommend patients do today as part of, we have to be our own health advocates. But you can ask your doctor, what do you know about nutrition? Did you get nutrition education in medical school? Most of them got very little. They learned a little bit about certain deficiency diseases, like pellagra and like, beriberi. These are certain, and of course the big vitamin C one, which leads to scurvy. So those are like kind of the big three, but there's others. But pellagra, beriberi, and of course scurvy. And scurvy is a vitamin C deficiency. And then pellagra and the other are different forms of different B vitamin deficiencies. And of course, so they'll learn basic things like that, but it's like we've known about a lot of those deficiency diseases for many, many, many decades, and as much as 100 years or even more for some of those things. So that's like old news, right? It's old science. But what our doctors don't know enough about is eating the kind of diet that's going to help promote health in the long term. And if people are dealing with a number of different chronic diseases that are common in our country, namely heart disease, type 2 diabetes, things like that, our doctors are not well versed in how to use food as medicine to help heal people. But nonetheless, nutrition is becoming more and more popular because it's becoming impossible to ignore the integral relationship that our food has with our health. And so if any doctor's worth a darn today, I've been in just to see regular primary care, just in random checkups, over the past few years. And my primary care that I just saw for the first time recently is a whole food plant-based vegan.
Whoa.
And another doctor that I saw about 4 years ago was the last time I had been to the doctor before that. I rarely go because I'm blessed to have good health. It was a guy who recommended vegan diets to people if they were dealing with things like, heart disease, type 2 diabetes, things like that. So those were literally my last two exposures to a primary care just in our medical system here in New Mexico. And now I'm not saying that everybody's going to have that same experience with me, but that's proof to me that many of our doctors do recognize the importance of nutrition. Not only do they recognize the importance of it, literally the two last doctors, one of them was a vegan, just like us, and the other one recommended vegan diets because they knew the potent efficacy that vegan diets have to improve people's health, especially when it comes to heart health, cardiovascular disease, the number one killer of Americans. And so this is real. It is getting better. It has a long way to go. And then number two, people, yes, we need to advocate for ourselves. We need to do research. The problem with doing research is there's so much misinformation online. It can be really hard to filter out the good from the not so good, or the bad, or the terrible. So that's the only problem with doing your own research. But I always plug nutritionfacts.org, right? That's one of the best resources online. If you take a medication or you have a certain disease or different medical condition that you're dealing with, type that in on nutritionfacts.org. Chronic kidney disease. You type in a medication because it's such a great resource. And then generally speaking, look for sources of information that come from reputable medical sources, right? That's coming from like a university, that's coming from the CDC, right? The center. A lot of people don't trust these organizations, but We have to have trust in some organizations, and the CDC is a federal government sponsored organization that's their sole responsibility, is producing evidence-based. So it's actually based in evidence, it's based in research, evidence-based information for public health, for our health. So we want to be using those reputable sources of information rather than just some random website by some person who's like, promoting the carnivore diet or the paleo diet or even the vegan diet, right? Because there's plenty of people who are just random folks promoting whatever diet online that don't know what they're talking about. We want to be getting our information from qualified professionals and evidence-based research so that we know it's not going to harm us in the process. But yeah, type in your medication, find out more online, ask questions of your doctor. Don't just go in as a passive patient and expect the doctor to do it all for you. We have to be active participants in every step of the process when it comes to our healthcare. And that means asking the hard questions, putting the pressure on your doctors. If they don't know, then darn it, ask to see a registered dietitian, because at least a registered dietitian has many years of nutrition training. And so they're a qualified professional who can help you if you may think if you just generally want to learn more about nutrition, or if you're taking a medication and you're worried about drug nutrient interactions, then you should definitely talk to a registered dietitian. And I know that's not always accessible and not always going to be available to everyone, but that's something that everybody should ask for, when they're interacting with the medical system, because you're probably going to get better information. Some doctors, like I say, they know nutrition is integral to health, and they're learning more and more about nutrition over time. But if your doctor doesn't, then advocate for yourself and say, I'd like to speak with somebody who can provide high quality information, evidence-based information for me so that I can take good care of my health and protect my health.
Another good resource, Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, of course. And I advocate for people to advocate for their own selves because, again, some doctors, yes, some are getting into understanding the value of the plant-based diet for people, for people's health, heart disease, diabetes, and so forth. But again, I unfortunately have had the experience where these doctors are not knowledgeable on this kind of a thing, and they tell you something. I was in 4 years ago for something else, and the guy said, the doctor came in and he said, the reason why this is happening is because you're a vegan and you're B12 deficient. So, and then he left. So the nurse comes back and I said, can you tell me what my numbers were on the B12? So she goes to look up the chart. He goes, we never tested that. So how does he know that I was B12 deficient, which, by the way, I wasn't? But here he is, and then he's going to base what his treatment is going to be for me on that without really having the right information. It's scary.
Yes, it certainly can be. And, doctors and just the medical system in general are one of the leading causes of death in America. We always talk about heart disease. We always talk about cancer. Those are the two biggest. Starts with heart disease, cancer's right below it. That kill the most people, that end the most lives. But doctors are right up there at the top of the list, behind just a couple, 2, 3, or 4 top ones. They're right up there. And you can't blame them for all of that. They're dealing with people who are deathly ill, who are coming in from traumatic accidents, who are dealing with severe medical conditions, and they have to perform serious surgeries, and they have to prescribe, in many cases, serious medications because people are dealing with some serious health issues. And so some of those things, it's bound to happen, right? But nonetheless, a lot of that is because, hey, we're humans. We make errors. We all make mistakes on a daily basis. And so the more you're having to interact with the healthcare system because you're dealing with illness and you're dealing with disease, the more your probabilities are going to increase that the human error that comes from doctors is going to hurt you. Literally. That's just the reality of it. And so that's why we want to do whatever we can to advocate prevention. And even if we are dealing with illness, to treat the root causes of disease, right? So rather than band-aiding the disease with a medication or a medical procedure, we treat the root cause, which is usually poor nutrition and lack of physical activity. Those are like the biggest two. And then right next to those is not getting high quality sleep. Without good sleep, we're going to have a really big negative impact on our health. And then right along with those other three is dealing with our stress. If we're chronically stressed, that's going to increase our risk for illness, disease, early death, etc. And so we need to have access to loving relationships. We need to do things that bring meaning to our life. Meditation, going on walks, having good conversations with people we care about, people who listen to us. All those things can help to control chronic stress. And so dealing with the chronic stress, sleep, getting enough sleep and high quality sleep, exercising, moving our bodies more, and then ideally eating a plant-based diet, a whole food plant-based diet is as close to that as we can, just eating lots and lots of whole plant foods. Those are the pillars that are going to protect our health and then keep us from interacting with the medical system all the time, where we have more and more opportunities for doctors to prescribe the wrong medications or make mistakes during procedures. It happens every day. These things happen that could injure us and potentially end our lives. And that's not to rag on doctors. They perform miracles. They do wonderful things every day, but they're humans and they make mistakes. And so they do injure people and they do kill people. It's just part of, it's just part of the process.
So eat healthy, exercise, and stay away from the medicals.
Well, I'm not saying no. Doctors do good work, and it's important for people to interact with the medical system because doctors can provide help. It's just the thicker we are and the more levels of extreme intervention that we need, like heart surgery, right? That's a pretty big deal. It's different to like have a little mole cut off of your body because you have a little mole or something that needs to be removed, or that might become cancerous. That's pretty minimal risk. Even if a doctor makes a little mistake, it's probably not going to do anything terrible to our health in the long term. But if we have, taken poor care of our cardiovascular health for decades, and then we have to have an open heart surgery, there's a pretty good chance that you're either never going to be the same after that, or that you could die because of the surgery, because it's just such an extreme surgery that there's great likelihood that something terrible could happen. Those are the things that we want to avoid if we can.
Right. Let me clarify. I didn't mean stay away. What I meant by stay away from the medical portion of society is eat healthy, exercise, and try to avoid needing to go to these places. That's what I meant to say. Because obviously, if you're hurt or if you need to see a doctor, by all means, you need to see a doctor. So I didn't mean to never see a doctor, but rather to do the best you can personally for yourself, so that you don't have to.
Exactly. Yeah, we don't want to be living our lives in doctors' offices. We want to be living our lives out in the world where we're enjoying friends, family, work that brings us meaning, and leisure that brings us joy.
Correct. Thank you, Gabriel, for another fact-filled Making Sense with Gabriel.
My pleasure, Nancy. Great to see you.
Same here. Thank you for joining us on another Vegan Pulse. Check out our website, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and like us on Facebook. If you have a pulse, you have a purpose. Live vegan.